Dr. Sarah Zito is going to talk to us now about rethinking unwanted cat management from a human-cat relationship perspective. Could you please welcome again Sarah?
All right, hello again, everybody. It's a bit of a hard gig straight after lunch, so I'm going to tell you a story or a few stories and try not to put you all to sleep. So the background to my story is this problem of unwanted cats that all of you are very familiar with. They're a problem because they can be a community nuisance. They can prey on our lovely wildlife. They are a problem because many of us are concerned about their welfare and about the ethics of the way that we deal with the problem. But they're also, of course, a financial burden to our society in the terms of how much money we're spending on managing them. They're a particular problem, obviously, for animal shelters, which is where a lot of you guys are coming from, because you're all struggling under the weight of a problem which has too many cats, too few homes, and in fact, too many cats that are not suitable for homes. And this means that many healthy cats are being euthanized. So, one of the main protagonists of my story is the RSPCA. They have to deal with the unwanted cat problem on a day-to-day basis and all of its associated problems. And to their credit, they identified that what we're doing, which is euthanizing a heap of healthy cats and not really getting on top of the problem, is not something that we want to keep doing. And they identified a number of areas that needed a scientific evidence base in order to inform new strategies that might help us to deal with the problem better. So humans are directly and indirectly involved in almost every aspect of the unwanted cat problem. They're making this problem as much of a human problem as it is a cat problem. And I truly believe that an inability to see it as much as a human problem as a cat problem is one of the things that's been hampering our efforts to get the problem under control. So in light of this, along with the RSPCA, me and my team of advisors decided to design a series of research projects that would help us to understand a little bit better the human involvement in the unwanted cat problem, and our findings are what I'm going to talk about now. So humans contribute to the creation and maintenance of unwanted cat populations by feeding unowned, unsterilised cats. They abandon cats, they irresponsibly own cats and allow them to roam around and breed freely. And I'm going to go into more detail about this contribution of humans a little later in the talk. But at the moment, I'm going to start by talking to you about the second contribution, which is the contribution that humans make by bringing these cats into shelters. And I'm not just talking here about owned cats, I'm using surrender as a term for both owned and unowned cats. So we collected data from people who were surrendering cats to Australian RSPCA shelters to find out why they were surrendering them. We allowed each person to give as many reasons as they wanted for the surrender. And what we found is that people surrendering their own cats most commonly reported accommodation-related reasons, personal reasons, financial reasons, unwanted kittens and cat allergies, and that's in line with research from other countries in the world. But with regards to unowned cats, shelters are usually just recording the surrender reason for these cats as stray. As far as I know, nobody's really asked these people why they're bringing the cats in. So when we did ask these people why they were surrendering unowned cats to shelters, we found that the people were often giving reasons that related to concern for the cat and its welfare. And some people also because obviously the cat wasn't theirs and they didn't know what to do with it if they were worried about it, and some people because they were irritated by the cat and they didn't want it on their property. So this is in line with what a few other people have talked about as well. But in addition to these reasons that related for concern and the cat not being theirs, they usually had some other reasons as well, usually at least one other reason. And these were not dissimilar to those for owned cats: accommodation-related reasons, the cat's behaviour, unwanted kittens, financial reasons. So as I mentioned, we allowed people to give as many reasons as they wanted, and we actually measured how many reasons they were giving. And this graph shows the total number of reasons given by owners, which is shown in blue, and non-owners shown in green. Now you can see it's really common for both owners and non-owners to have multiple reasons for the surrender, but non-owners had more reasons than owners. So our findings, I think, demonstrate how complex the surrender decisions usually are, with a lot of different reasons contributing to that decision to bring the cat in. And it really, I hope, demonstrates the need to record multiple reasons for surrender and not just give people only the option of giving one reason only. Because if we're going to properly understand why people are surrendering cats, we need to be able to capture the complexity of that decision. So the information, as I said, about reasons for the surrender of unowned cats wasn't available before. So shortly we'll be publishing some articles, some papers in some journals that will show you these findings and all of the data associated with them. But what our work does identify is that shelters could benefit from recording reasons for the surrender of unowned cats beyond just that the cat was stray, because there really is more to the picture than just that the cat was stray. The information that shelters can obtain by doing this could help them to understand and more effectively address the sources of unowned cats that are entering their shelter, but it could also help them in decision making when it comes to that individual cat that's being surrendered. So in addition to surrendering cats, humans are also contributing to the creation and maintenance of unwanted cats through their relationship with unowned cats. And we collected information from people who interacted with cats, both people who were surrendering those cats, but also just people in the general public who weren't surrendering those cats and were just looking after them. We wanted to find out about their perception of ownership and what influenced that. We wanted to know what their interactions were with the cats and what caretaking they provided to those cats. And we also wanted to know what their beliefs and attitudes, perceived behavioural control factors and social norms were relating to cats. Now, when we discuss the unwanted cat population, we generally talk about cats in different categories, or you might call them subpopulations. And the cat subpopulations usually talked about with reference to cats entering shelters are owned and stray. Stray here, I think in America it's feral, and it might be something different somewhere else, but those are the two main categories that we talk about. But this really is an oversimplification of a far more complex range of relationships that people have with cats. Now, those relationships, when you look in the literature, they're normally defined in terms of how that cat interacts with people. So not long into my research, it became very clear to me that the concept of cat ownership is inextricably linked to the problem of unwanted cats. But information about the perception of cat ownership was lacking in the literature. Now, probably most of us in this room have a really similar concept of what cat ownership means, but it can differ hugely from person to person. And the reason why this is of importance is that people who are involved in the unwanted cat problem may have a concept of cat ownership which is vastly different from our own. If we don't understand these differences and how they can impact on cat overpopulation and its management, it's not going to help us in trying to manage the problem effectively. So what I learnt about human-cat relationships in the course of my research really challenged the way that I think about human-cat relationships and ownership perception, what that means for the problem. Now, I just want to get you thinking a little bit about your concept of human-cat relationships and cat ownership. And I want you to consider which of these cats you think are owned and which might be what we consider stray or unowned, and why. Now, these are all real cats in real human-cat relationships that I know, and I know quite a bit about these cats. Now, I just want to ask you, if you were allowed to ask questions about these cats, now anything apart from, do you own that cat? How would you determine whether that cat was owned? Would you be able to, just from those questions? Now, I'm going to start off by telling you that all of these cats but one is considered owned. And the odd one out is what we would call a semi-owned cat. Now, I don't know how interactive you guys are feeling straight after lunch, but if you want to participate, I'm willing to take questions and tell you about these cats. So does anyone want to ask a question? Or nobody wants to participate? Oh, there's a lady over there. Yay. Yes, all of the cats are being fed. Jackie. All of the 3 bottom cats are neutered and the 2 on the top are not. Was that the same question from someone over there? Yes?
Do they sleep in the house or outside of the house?
All of the 3 at the bottom sleep inside the person's house. The top 2 come and go as they please, so they can if they want to, but they don't necessarily. Yes?
Do they have names?
They all have names. The 3 down at the bottom are microchipped. They don't have collars on, but they are microchipped. All of them. So sorry, go ahead. Do they all get vet care if they need it? So how are we feeling about these cats? Another question?
Are they all highly sociable?
Yes, they're all very sociable. So they all interact with their humans on a day-to-day basis. Yes, all cared for by one person at one address. Good question. Yep. The 3 at the bottom are. The 2 top ones are probably not vaccinated quite as frequently as they should be, but they are vaccinated or were at some stage. So how are we all feeling about these cats? Is anyone willing to take bets? Well, that comes down to ownership perception, doesn't it? Now, okay, so I'm going to take a show of hands. So the black and white cat up the top, do you think it is the unowned cat? Put your hands up. Yeah, quite a few people. The little ginger guy on the wall? Yeah, a few people. How about the blue-eyed little girl down the bottom? Just a couple? What about the guy sitting on someone's lap in the middle staring up with adoring eyes? Just 3 or 4 people? And the lovely long-haired lady on the left.
Is this the cat you want to take home?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that the little guy in the middle staring up adoringly from the lap of his semi-owner, who's desexed, microchipped, vaccinated, gets vet care, gets holiday care organised for him, when I ask his owner, I think he's owned, but she says no. So he is the semi-owned cats. The 2 beautiful girls with the blue eyes, they are mine, so there you go. And the other 2 are what I would call not quite responsibly owned cats, but their owner considers themselves the owner. Okay, so that was a bit of fun. Okay. So human-cat relationships are really complex, as you can tell from that little interlude, and they can have a wide spectrum of manifestations. And included in this spectrum are owners, semi-owners, and people who just interact casually with cats. Now, ownership perception really is the key differentiating factor between owners and semi-owners. So they might display all of the same behaviours that we would consider to be ownership behaviours, but they just do not perceive ownership for that cat. All right, and I'm just going to illustrate my point about the similarities of owners and semi-owners with these cats. Again, they're all cats, real human-cat relationships that I know of. All of these cats are fed, all of them allowed in the house. They're loved, cuddled, wormed, vaccinated, given vet care, have holiday care organised for them, but only one of these cats is considered owned. Now, the fact is that without knowing the ownership perception, how are you going to tell which one's the owned one? Well, apart from the fact that if you knew which one lived at my house, apart from that you wouldn't know, okay? Now you might ask, why do we care? But there is a need to differentiate between human-cat relationships because these define a cat subpopulation. And each subpopulation is going to need a different approach to management. What works for one group is not going to work for all of them. So just as an example, mandatory desexing legislation applies to cat owners, and it may be successful in reducing the number of unwanted kittens born to owned cats. It will, however, have no effect on the semi-owned cat population, because these are people who do not believe that they are the owner of the cat, so they don't think the legislation applies to them, so they're not going to comply. So out of these cats, only the handsome ginger boy up in the corner in the grass, who is mine, is the only one who's not going to be contributing to the semi-owned cat population. Okay. So this brings me to our findings about determinants of ownership perception. Now, we found that active acquisition was a really strong determinant of ownership perception. In fact, every single person who went out and actively acquired their cat, that is, planned to acquire their cat, said that they were the owner of that cat. The other important determinants of ownership perception were a longer association time, greater attachment to the cat, and a greater feeling of responsibility towards that cat. The more caretaking behaviours and interactions a person had with a cat, the more likely they were to perceive ownership. And the cat being friendly and in good health was also associated with ownership perception, although obviously we don't know the direction of causation of that relationship. It could well be the opposite. So if you own a cat, it might be friendlier and healthier. And interestingly, of all the attitudes, beliefs, social norms and behavioural control factors that we asked about, those that determined ownership perception were those associated with feelings about stray cats and how acceptable it was to feed them. So for example, those people for whom feeding a stray cat made them feel good and who believed that people who were important to them would approve of them feeding a stray cat, they were less likely to perceive ownership of a cat that they were caring for. Instead, people who felt that they couldn't feed a stray cat because of their beliefs, they were more likely to perceive ownership for a cat. And we only compared cats that were passively acquired and that the person had been associated with for at least a month. So these are cats that could actually be in the same relationship, they just have a difference in their perception of ownership of the person caring for them. So in addition to semi-owners, there is another group of people who interact with unowned cats, but this relationship is a far more casual one. These people may interact with a cat or feed it just once or only very rarely, and this kind of casual cat interaction is unlikely to have a huge impact on the unwanted cat problem. So it's important to differentiate semi-ownership from casual cat interactions because semi-ownership can and should be addressed in management strategies. But it's not really that important to worry about those people who stroke a cat once or feed it when it's looking hungry and never see the cat again. So in order to differentiate these two groups, cat semi-owners need to be identified through data collection with criteria that will allow them to be differentiated from people who have a casual interaction with a cat that they're bringing in, or the data that we're looking at is going to be very confusing. So in our research, we were able to effectively differentiate these two human-cat relationships by applying the following criteria to people who considered themselves non-owners. So if they had an association time of 1 month or more and a feeding frequency of frequently or always, we considered those people to be cat semi-owners. And if they didn't meet both of those criteria, we considered it to be just a casual cat interaction, and we only compared the semi-owners with the owners. Now, these criteria are pretty simple things to ask people, so in theory these could be used by shelters and welfare organisations to provide some more accurate data about semi-ownership and its contribution to your intake of cats. Now, this graph shows data which we categorised using the criteria on the last slide that I just explained to you. To differentiate the different human-cat relationships. Now, cats considered unowned were divided into semi-ownership categories, and that's shown in green, casual cat interaction shown in red. In addition, we also divided up the ownership group into owners of passively acquired cats that are shown in blue and owners of passively acquired cats, shown in yellow. So the data here shows the different relationships in terms of the human-cat interactions, like stroking or spending time with the cat. Also the cat caretaking, so there's a whole host of things we asked about, from whether they confined the cat to whether they gave yearly vet checks to whether they dewormed, microchipped, ID'd the cat, etc. We also collected data on whether the cats were sterilised and if they had had kittens. And you can see that the parameters measured were generally very similar for the cats in the two ownership groups, but there were really significant differences between the ownership group and the semi-ownership group, and also the semi-ownership group and the casual cat interactions. Now, all caretaking and interactions were more common in the ownership relationships compared to the semi-ownership relationships, particularly the more responsible behaviours like identification, desexing and confinement. But nonetheless, you'll see from the graph that caretaking interactions are commonly displayed towards cats that are considered unowned, including semi-owned cats. Now, all caretaking and interactions were more common in semi-ownership relationships as opposed to casual cat interactions, which is to be expected. And in addition, and I think of particular interest to us, is that more semi-owned cats were reported to have had kittens than the other groups, particularly the owned groups, when we're looking at the difference between the two. So although semi-ownership has been suggested as a contributing factor to shelter intakes, direct evidence of that hasn't really been available. In our work with people surrendering cats, we did find that many cats being surrendered as stray were in fact semi-owned when we asked the right questions. Additionally, we found that many people surrendering both owned and unowned cats had previously semi-owned cats that they were not surrendering or they hadn't surrendered. And also there was a reasonable proportion of people who were still semi-owning cats despite bringing in a cat when we enrolled them in the study. So here I'm talking not just about the people surrendering cats they said were unowned, but these are people who brought in their own cat and they're still looking after a cat at home or have been looking after a cat that they don't consider their own. So we were also able to demonstrate direct evidence of the contribution of cat semi-ownership to unwanted cat numbers in the community by showing that semi-owned cats are more likely to have had kittens than owned cats, and that unwanted kittens were an important reason for surrender of semi-owned cats. So all of this information put together shows us that semi-owned cats surrendered to shelters are only the tip of the iceberg, with many more still in the community, still contributing to the community's unwanted cat population and potentially likely to be surrendered in the future or have their kittens surrendered in the future. And therefore, this source of cat overpopulation really has to be identified and addressed if we are to decrease cat shelter intakes and unwanted cats in the community. Now, to successfully manage complex problems like the unwanted cat problem, management strategies really do need to identify and involve all of the stakeholders in the problem. And our findings and those of others, I think, make it pretty clear that cat semi-owners are stakeholders in this problem, much as we might not want to admit it. But they are often overlooked when it comes to management plans for unwanted cats. So as you've seen throughout the talk so far, human-cat relationships take many different forms. And although it might be ideal if we could make all cat semi-owners take ownership of those cats, realistically that's not going to happen. And equally, if we want them all to stop doing that, they're not going to stop either. We've tried and failed that too. But, and this is a really important but, getting people to take ownership of their cats, while it might be ideal, it's not necessary for us to achieve our objectives of reducing unwanted cat numbers and improving cat welfare. Another thing that should be apparent from our findings and those of others is that cat semi-owners care about their cats and the cat's welfare, despite their lack of ownership perception, and this has really important implications on how to include them in management strategies. The introduction of lethal control methods is likely to alienate semi-owners, which is going to damage our efforts to try and get this source of cats under control. Semi-owners are far more likely to be amenable to non-lethal control methods. And yes, this would involve so-called return to field programs, where, for example, cats are desexed and returned to where they came from with the person who was already looking after them. And I'm well aware that return to field programs are quite a controversial subject, particularly here in Australia. But I think if we recognise the need to include semi-owners in our plans to try and reduce the number of unwanted cats, we need to consider these programs very carefully. Because the alternative, which is ignoring semi-owners or just trying to stop this behaviour, hasn't worked in the past, and there's no reason to think that that's going to change in the future. And I think the important thing for people to understand is this is not a choice between cats and no cats. You know, we aren't going to get rid of all of the cats ever, I don't think. And here we're talking about urban cat populations. I'm not going to venture into the feral cat debate, but when we're talking about cats with carers, I think it's framed in a slightly different way. Now, I just have another thought for you. Our findings suggest that the longer a person is associated with the cat, and the more caretaking behaviours they show towards the cat, the more likely they are to perceive ownership. So this may mean that over time, semi-owners who are supported and encouraged to be more responsible semi-owners may actually end up taking ownership of that cat, which is what we wanted all along. Now, I'm just going to go through a few summary slides, just giving some specific examples of how the findings from our research could be applied and some suggestions for future directions. And I think one of the most important application of our findings is that it's provided us with a basis with which we can improve the data that is collected about cats being surrendered and people surrendering cats. And better data means a better evidence base that we can use to inform strategies that hopefully will make them better. And firstly, it's important to collect data from people who are surrendering unowned cats, not just people surrendering owned cats. We're missing out on a heap of really useful data by not doing that, and it's really not difficult. Collecting data on the complex and multiple reasons for surrender, both in owned and unowned cats, can help to tailor our intervention strategies to help individual cats and humans, for example, by providing help that might be able to prevent that surrender entirely. But if that's not possible, it's still going to give us information about the cat that could help in caring for it and potentially help in finding it a new home. But also the collection of detailed data which gives us a more realistic picture of why people are surrendering cats in our catchment areas. It helps us to discern patterns, and this helps us to plan targeted strategies to try and reduce the number of cats being surrendered. So just by adding a few simple questions to an intake procedure like the ones I talked about means that we can quite easily identify these different human-cat relationships when people are bringing cats in. Collecting information which allows us to categorise cats more effectively will help us to make better plans for them. We can also link that data to location, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that will help in a minute. So the information about human-cat relationships from our study can help improve the delivery of messages by targeting to the people who are actually involved in the problem, in the areas that we're working with. And again, a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work with these people, so that is really important. Improve cat categorisation. So the first thing that I would suggest is that if shelters can, they include a semi-owned cat category on intake. So you don't have just stray and owned, but you have owned, semi-owned and stray. If you can link this information with location information using some new technologies like GIS mapping, this can help you to target specific campaigns to the people you know are contributing in specific locations. The information that we have can help tailor our messages to those people, and we can really be more effective by targeting the right people in the right way, in the right place. So these kind of campaigns might include both education but also facilitation of desexing, and could be targeted at areas which we know have a semi-ownership and surrender population problem. So in particular, application of our findings will allow the identification of semi-owners, both those that are surrendering a semi-owned cat, but also those who are not surrendering a cat at the moment. So these are those cat owners who are surrendering a cat who are semi-owning cats themselves, or those semi-owners who still have semi-owned cats at home. And this gives us a chance to intervene with these people before they bring in that cat for surrender. We can help them, we can counsel them, we can provide desexing services to them so that hopefully that problem does not spiral out of control, and we all know that it can very quickly. And if I haven't already stressed enough how important I think it is to include cat semi-owners in unwanted cat management plans, I'm going to do it again. It's clear that they're making a really significant contribution to shelter intakes and unwanted cats in the community, so they need to be included in our plans to address the problem. The information about human-cat relationships from the studies that we've done can help us design programs which are likely to result in better cooperation from cat semi-owners in particular. And the programs particularly, I would suggest, aimed at desexing these cats so they're not producing more unwanted cats. Now, in Australia, we would need a new legal framework, including a revision of the way that cats are defined under the law in order to allow return to field programs such as those that I'm talking about to actually happen. And this is really the only way that we're going to engage these stakeholders in getting a resolution to this problem. So just finally, I just wanted to add my voice to those of others who've spoken during this conference to say that things don't have to remain the way that they are and the way that they've been for such a long time, where we continually euthanize healthy cats for no real benefit. We do now have knowledge, we have data to back it up, we have examples of success like those presented at this conference from the States and elsewhere. All we really need now is the will and the action to make it happen here in Australia, so hopefully we can do that. Thank you very much.